Welcome back. We're here with our panel of experts. Let's dive in. One of the top Pfizer executives admitted under oath that the company never tested its mRNA COVID vaccine to see if it had prevented virus transmission. Pfizer's Janine Small, the president of International Developed Markets, explained this during a hearing.
Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market. And from that point of view, we had to do everything at risk.
Charisse, officials in the United States have long told us that COVID vaccines can indeed prevent transmission, and we've suddenly seen them change this narrative.
Right. Well, this is a clear issue of false advertising, essentially, right? At the end of the day, they were willing to lie to get people to take the vaccine, and that's exactly what happened. So either Fauci and the CDC knew that it could not prevent transmission and prescribed it anyway and lied to the American public, or they didn't know and they weren't sure, it was a toss-up and it was complete negligence because they said it anyway. So this is something that should be addressed and that they should be held accountable as public servants.
What's interesting is this is a forum which is obviously occurring in Europe somewhere. And so it appears that, the questioning of the vaccine started in America. It started with conservatives who were questioning the efficacy of this whole process, the lockdowns and the mandates. Mm-hmm. But it appears that this skepticism is spreading, and it's spreading to a lot of people in Europe who were previously thought to be mainstream, right, who are now asking questions about the vaccine, which started here with conservatives like Rand Paul, like mm-hmm. Jim Jordan, like other people who people said were wingnuts because they were questioning Dr. Fauci. And it turns out, guess who? Guess what? Some of these people knew what they were talking about. Some of these people were looking at the mm-hmm. science and are raising questions, and now other people are asking those same questions in other forums where they were previously they didn't question lockdowns, they didn't question mm-hmm. the vaccine. So this is very interesting.
I think you're right. It's very telling that the Europeans of all groups are starting to question this. And when you see the Europeans questioning the narrative, then you know that the dominoes are going to start to fall. The Consumer Price Index came in scorching hot Thursday morning this week at 8.2% year over year for the month of September. This number was bigger than the expected inflation rate of 8.1%. This comes after President Joe Biden tried to gaslight Americans on CNN regarding the state of the economy.
Should the American people prepare for a recession?
No. Look, they've been saying this now every 6 months they say this. Every 6 months they look down the next 6 months and see what's going to happen. It hadn't happened yet. It hadn't. There's no guarantee that they're going to be. I don't think there will be a recession. If it is, it'll be a very slight recession. That is, we'll move down slightly.
John, that was such a difficult interview to watch. And the things that he said was even more difficult to understand.
Would you buy a used car from that man? Now, come on, tell me the truth. Would you? Would anybody? I don't know. But boy, it's amazing. You want to talk about detached. I don't know what newspapers or magazines he's been reading. It's pretty clear that there's been a recession going on. A lot of people say they feel it. This is one reason that Republicans may well clean up, in November, on the November elections.
And they have the gall to defy traditional definitions of recession and say that we're not in a recession. They continue to insist that we're not in a recession. There was a little bit of an admission that we're kind of somewhat in a recession now in that interview, but still, he's
Webster's is revising their definition of recession even as we speak, because they've just decided that the Biden administration is correct. But I don't know, when you spend $4 trillion in a year on a $20 trillion, GDP, What, me worry?
Well, it's clear that they're willing to gaslight the American public on this issue rather than actually acknowledge that this is actually a priority issue, that American voters, every year, every time they go to the poll during election cycles, they recognize the economy as a priority issue. So it's either they're going to take care of it and resolve the issue, or they're out of ideas. And so they'd rather just gaslight and lie about it.
And it goes beyond, I think, just the issues of whether we're in a recession or not. It's like they're actively trying to undermine the economy. As this happened, they issued a notice saying they're expanding the number of H-2A farm workers that are going to be permitted to enter the United States. So if we're in a recession, Americans don't have enough money, Americans are having trouble finding jobs. Why are we importing foreign labor to worsen the economy?
The question is, though, supposedly Republicans are going to win in November. But nobody's asking the question, will the Republicans be able to change course? Will they be able to use the leverage that they have, the little bit that they have? And that's an open question because they have been, in the past, been somewhat timid when it comes to challenging a Democratic administration. We saw that during the Obama administration. So it'll be interesting to see if the Republicans actually do what they say they're going to do.
There's a lot of popular support behind pushing the Republicans to really go in bullish against the Biden administration, John. So is there, to what extent is the conservative leadership, Republican leadership on the Hill
What conservative
sensitive?
leadership? Where is that conservative leadership? Show me.
That's another question. But to what extent
Are you talking about Mitch McConnell there, by the way?
Well, McCarthy, too. How sensitive are they to the demands of the American public, who have clearly shown that they are very upset with this administration? Polling numbers every day showed that the approval numbers for this administration continue to take a nosedive. How sensitive are the Republicans going to be going after the midterms?
They say they're going to be very sensitive, and they say they have a plan. They've announced the commitment to America, and they have a plan. Now, the question is, will they follow that plan, and who will be around to hold their feet to the fire? How many more Republican members of Congress will there be? Will the Freedom Caucus, the conservative element in the House, will they have leverage depending on the number of new House members, the number of new members of the Freedom Caucus? A lot of it depends on how big a victory Republicans have in November. And what that looks like when the dust settles. But this is a big question because, it's the old rope-a-dope that Republican leadership has had in the past of we're going to be conservative, really, we promise, and then
Once they get power, they do nothing.
They do nothing, or they just kind of say they're conservative, but they aren't really, and, So this is what a lot of conservatives, a lot of people who watch this network are wondering about right now. And it's hard to tell, but that's the next big issue, I think, is making Republicans do what they said they were going to do.
And there's a lot to track, right? There's so many categories in which we need there's so many categories in which the public is interested in: the economy, the border, crime. It'll be interesting. Reports show that Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was told that no Haitian migrants were whipped despite the photo, which was alleged to show such action. Despite reportedly knowing this, Mayorkas called the alleged whipping horrifying. Judge, this is an area that you are particularly familiar with. Why is Mayorkas playing along here?
Because he doesn't care about the truth. I worked with Ali Mayorkas. He is not a nice person. He's not interested in the truth, and he's not interested in the rule of law. He's interested in a particular political agenda. And so the narrative of the Border Patrol agents abusing Haitian migrants when they're actually trying to save them from doing something rash, it fits his political views. So he's not interested in the truth. He's interested in spreading a narrative that the Border Patrol is bad. And this is a huge problem because he doesn't have the confidence of the people working in the department that he's responsible for overseeing.
I've spoken to CBP agents and people who work at DHS, and they tell me that there's never been a more despised Secretary of DHS Secretary.
I think that's true. I mean, the Border Patrol is an extremely difficult job. I think it's very rewarding for the people who like it and who do it for the right reasons. The Border Patrol saves more people than it has ever had any negative experiences with. And I have encountered in the course of my career migrants who said, geez, I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for things like the Border Patrol. They have a special team called Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue, BORSTAR, where their sole mission is to rescue people who become stranded in the desert. And I think that speaks volumes about what kind of a country the United States is, but also what kind of people the Border Patrol attracts. So this ridiculous notion of demonizing law enforcement in general, and in particular immigration law enforcement, is just terrible, and it needs to stop.
It's just so egregious, though, that Mayorkas would know that this is false, but still chooses to attack his own people here.
But this touches on the trend of the party and of the left. This is what we've just been talking about on every topic, is that they are willing to lie in order to gain points, score points that way, and then the next day they can turn around and say something completely different, score additional points, and no one's holding them accountable to the lies.
And they're trying to turn the Department of Homeland Security into a concierge service. I mean, clearly the end game here is to pack as many people as the administration can get from abroad, whether they're here legally or not, in hopes that there will be an amnesty and they can mint, millions of new Democrat voters, thereby ensuring perpetual Democrat Party rule until the end of whenever.
It's such a tragedy that they're making this such a political issue, because these are real lives involved, and the human trafficking element of this is just so appalling. Really, really, it is a tragedy. When we return, Tulsi Gabbard leaves the Democrat Party. Is there a bigger political motive at hand? We'll be right back. Former Congresswoman and presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard announced this week that she's leaving the Democratic Party.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party. It's now under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms enshrined in our Constitution, and who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police, who protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war.
John, what box would you start shifting Tulsi Gabbard here?
I'd say she's out of the box. I hate it when she holds things back like that. She's so demure and retiring all the time.
Is she angling for a run at the presidency?
Well, she probably is. Of course, she ran once before. I wouldn't be surprised to see her running as an independent, perhaps, in a couple of years. And that certainly would give her a forum to talk about what apparently she wants to talk about something, and she has a message because she's got a podcast there, and it's very professional.
Right.
The sound is great. So she's hired somebody who knows what they're doing.
She looks, from what she just said, she sounded awfully like a libertarian to me.
She sounds like a libertarian unless you scratch the surface, in which you find that she has a lot of old school Democrat traditional notions. Right. Supporter of unions, labor, that sort of thing. But she's talking a line which is interesting, which is not that far off from Donald Trump in many ways. And she's also very critical, not coincidentally. She's gone out of her way to be critical of the current vice president. She said nothing happened to her, meaning Kamala Harris, when she smoked pot, but she was very happy to keep people in prison and put people in jail for doing the same thing. Kamala Harris is a perfect example of everything that is wrong in Washington and with the Democratic Party of today, talking about hypocrisy. She's made a point there. But it seems like she has a very specific target in Kamala Harris, a very specific target in the current administration. And it seems like she's all about a message right now. And
is she angling for a vice presidential position then?
I think it's very possible. That's how you get to be vice president, is just by doing things like this.
Right.
And going out on the campaign trail and getting your message out and proving if you can attract a constituency, if you can attract people to your forums, if you put out a message and people respond, That's very attractive to somebody being chosen for a vice president. That's what they want to see, is this person, can they move people? Can they persuade people? Do they have an appealing message? And is there a voting bloc that will receive that message and respond? Right now, it's very unusual within the Democratic Party, her message. It's very Trumpian in many elements, which is interesting, and that's why she might be an attractive vice presidential candidate. Can she pull people back from the Democratic Party with this more traditional message? And that may indeed be
She
what
certainly
she's
has a magnetism, right? That's,
Oh, yes.
It's hard to deny that she has a magnetism, she has a charisma that would be a fascinating choice for somebody.
And if Biden doesn't run again, the Democratic Party really doesn't have a deep bench when it comes to who could go. So
that's right. Saudi Arabia has hit back at President Biden. The Saudis have claimed they were pressured by the Biden administration to delay the decision to cut oil production by a month. This would have put the oil cuts right after the U.S. midterms. Judge, does this surprise you?
Doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, the Biden administration seems to be deficient in basic geopolitics. I think Saudi Arabia has been a longtime ally. They've been instrumental in maintaining peace in the Middle East, and there is no reason to be driving them into the arms of the Russians or the Chinese. In addition, if you're going to pursue the foolhardy energy policies the Biden administration is pursuing, they're one of the key sources of oil. So this really doesn't make any sense. It just seems to be misguided.
It just seems like on the foreign policy front, the Biden administration just is shooting itself in the foot time and time again, which in turn is affecting all of us. We are now on the cusp of a nuclear altercation with Russia.
Well, remember, Chanel, we're moving to sunshine and windmills in terms of our energy policy. We don't want dirty oil. We don't want the Saudis, do we? We don't need them, and this is exactly what he was saying during the campaign trail.
Right.
And this is kind of an example of payback. The Saudis are saying, hey,
we need oil, but we just don't want to get our hands dirty, right? We want
it's dirty.
just use all the reserve oil that we need for emergencies instead.
Completely deplete our reserves. That's going to be a very difficult thing to justify a few years from now, I think. Reports show that Harvard University has labeled a student using incorrect pronouns to identify other students as abuse in a mandated Title IX course for all undergraduate students. Harvard explains that attitudes such as sizeism and fat phobia, cis heterosexism, racism, transphobia, ageism, and ableism all contribute to environments that perpetuate violence. Charisse, I am so ashamed of my alma mater right now. This is pretty absurd.
Yes, and I think this is just the beginning of what we're about to see once the Biden administration opens up the floodgates with their new Title IX rules. So they've proposed new rules now that will make gender identity a protected class. And it will also remove a very important standard called the Davis standard, which is when speech will become harassing conduct. And right now, the current rules say that speech has to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive in order to become harassment. But the Biden administration is going to jettison that. And if gender identity is a protected class, then all of a sudden things like microaggressions, not using pronouns, not affirming gender identity, those will be considered Title IX sexual harassment. And people will be able to file claims on campuses against one another on these issues, and students will be processed. And usually during the process, you're expelled or suspended during the investigation. There's already a bunch of due process issues. And so, like I said, this is just the beginning of the floodgates opening. And, Harvard and a lot of the private institutions are starting to implement what they're seeing is going to be in front of them. Because universities, let's keep in mind, they've already shown a pretty strong propensity to want to shut down speech and censor speech.
Can I ask a question? Does anybody here know what cis heterosexism is? Do you know? I tried to look, I was preparing for this, and I tried to look this up.
And you looked
I
it up.
could not find out what this means.
No, nothing
What
on
does that
Webster's?
mean?
That's exactly the point. I mean, George Orwell said this: if you want to destroy the system, destroy the language. So once you take away the meaning,
Heterosexism, what in the world?
you take away the meaning of the regular words, and then you can punish anyone for saying anything that you don't like because you can base it on the claim that they're not using the correct language. And that's what's truly frightening about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Are we cis heterosexual? Do we know? I don't even know.
I don't think we know. And I think even not knowing could also be an insult here. It could be a
I thought cis and
microaggression.
hetero were supposed to be the same, but I am
What's so
confused now,
sad
I've
about
never heard this one.
microaggressions is this idea that words are violence, that emotions can be violence, that one's opinions could be equated to physical violence. And when you realize that our young people are being raised in this environment, this is the generation that would potentially be protecting this nation. Matt O'Brien, Sharice Trump, John Hines, thank you all so much for joining us.